I remember the day I stumbled upon the thread like it was yesterday. It was a cold winter evening, and I had just settled into my favorite armchair with a warm cup of coffee, feeling grateful for the anonymity that Reddit provided. As I scrolled through the r/creepypasta community, one post caught my eye, a user named Shatterdow, sharing a haunting tale of Ravenswood, a small town shrouded in mystery and terror. The title read, "Winter Horror Stories from Ravenswood," and I couldn't resist clicking on it. As I began to read, the words seemed to seep into my bones like frost. It was as if the author had uncovered a dark secret that only revealed itself during the harshest winter months. The stories were fragmented, shared by various users, each with their own twisted experience in Ravenswood. They spoke of unexplained occurrences, doors slamming shut on their own, disembodied whispers in the dead of night, and an eerie feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake off the sensation that these weren't just tales of fiction, but a cry for help from those who had been consumed by something sinister. As I delved deeper into the thread, I found myself drawn into a world where reality blurred with myth. The more I read, the more I felt compelled to share my own story, if only to warn others about the horrors that lurked in Ravenswood's frozen heart. Little did I know, I was about to take a journey into the very depths of terror. I first learned about Ravenswood through a series of Reddit posts, but it wasn't until I decided to take a road trip up north that I finally set eyes on the town. Nestled deep in the heart of winter, Ravenswood was like a ghost town, shrouded in an eternal mist that clung to everything it touched. The streets were lined with old, worn-out houses that seemed to lean inwards, as if sharing some dark secret. It was as if time had forgotten about this place, leaving behind only the faintest whispers of its former life. I stopped at a local diner, where the proprietor eyed me warily before asking where I was headed. "Ravenswood," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded curtly and handed me a cup of cold coffee, saying, "You'll be leaving that place when night falls." His words seemed laced with an unspoken warning, but I brushed it off as mere small-town paranoia. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ravenswood began to transform into something sinister. The streets, once empty, now seemed to fill with shadows that moved of their own accord. I could have sworn I saw figures darting around corners, only to vanish into thin air when I turned to look. My skin crawled as I realized I was not alone in this forsaken town. The diner's owner watched me from across the room, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. He beckoned me over, his bony finger wiggling like a claw. "You should leave now," he whispered, his breath reeking of decay. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to take his advice. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something on the diner's menu that made my blood run cold. Ravenswood special 5 days, 3 nights in our haunted cabin, only $200. I knew then that I was trapped in this town, and whatever horrors Ravenswood held, I was about to face them head-on. As night fell, the mist grew thicker, shrouding everything in an impenetrable veil. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it was waiting for me to make my next move. And then, just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard my first whisper, a soft, raspy voice that seemed to come from all around me, echoing an unspoken phrase. "Welcome to Ravenswood." As the days passed, I found myself drawn into a vortex of Reddit threads, each one more chilling than the last. It started with Shatterdow's initial post, followed by a steady stream of users sharing their own stories of supernatural encounters in Ravenswood. The thread quickly gained momentum, as if the very mention of the town was enough to awaken some dormant force. One user, known only as Winterwitch, claimed to have been stalked by an unseen presence through her apartment's ventilation system. Another, Raven Rider, spoke of being forced to participate in a twisted game of survival where the stakes were always raised and the players were never seen again. Each post was more disturbing than the last, yet I found myself devouring them like a junkie craving their next fix. The collective energy of these threads seemed to be building towards something, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Still, I knew I had to keep reading to see if anyone else might be able to shed some light on the mysteries of Ravenswood. As I scrolled through the thread, I began to notice a common theme, an eerie feeling of being watched. It seemed that no matter where the users were in Ravenswood, they all shared this creeping sense of unease. Some attributed it to the town's dark history, while others claimed it was simply the result of too many late nights spent huddled around computers. But I knew better. I could feel it myself, a prickle at the back of my neck that never seemed to fade. I had been reading the thread for days, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't until I received a private message from Shatterdow that I realized I wasn't alone in my observations. The message was brief. Meet me at the old windmill on the outskirts of town at midnight if you want to know more about Ravenswood. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should take the risk, but something about Shatterdow's words resonated with me, and I decided to trust them. As I approached the windmill, I noticed that it seemed to loom over me, its wooden slats creaking ominously in the wind. The moon was full overhead, casting an eerie glow over the entire scene. I pushed open the creaky door and called out into the darkness, "Hello, is anyone here?" There was no response, but I could have sworn I heard a faint whispering in my ear. It was soft and raspy, like the rustling of dry leaves. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, a figure materialized out of the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I tried to step back, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The figure began to move closer, its presence filling the entire space. I could feel its breath on my skin, cold and rank. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The whispering stopped, and the windmill was silent once more. I stumbled backward, my heart racing with fear. As I turned to flee, I noticed a small piece of paper clutched in the figure's hand. It bore a single phrase, scrawled in red ink: "You shouldn't be here." I knew then that I had crossed into a realm where the unknown was all too real. As I ventured deeper into Ravenswood's woods, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. The trees seemed to loom over me, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. It was on one of these winter nights that I first saw them, strange lights flickering through the darkness like fireflies on a summer's day. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but as I watched, the lights grew brighter and began to take shape. They were orbs, glowing with an otherworldly light, and they seemed to be moving of their own accord. I tried to follow them, but they darted and weaved through the trees, leading me deeper into the woods. The air was filled with an eerie silence, as if the very creatures of the forest were holding their breath in anticipation of something. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that I was not alone in the woods. Something, or someone else, was out here with me, and it was watching me. The lights grew brighter still, until they seemed to be illuminating the entire forest floor. And then, in an instant, they vanished. I was left standing there, bathed in darkness, wondering if I had really seen what I thought I had. But as I turned to leave, I saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line. It was shrouded in shadow, but I could sense its presence like a cold wind on my skin. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished too. I knew then that I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself, something that threatened to consume me whole. As I stood there, bathed in the darkness of the forest, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. It was then that I saw him, a figure shrouded in shadows, standing just beyond the tree line. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized that he was there. He was tall and gaunt, with long fingers that seemed to be grasping for something in the air. His face was deathly pale, with sunken eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I felt a chill run down my spine as he began to move towards me, his movements slow and deliberate. As he drew closer, I saw that he was dressed in tattered robes that seemed to be blowing in the wind, even though there was no breeze. His presence was like a cold wind on a winter's day, and I could feel his eyes on me like a weight. I tried to speak, but my voice was caught in my throat. The figure stopped just a few feet away from me, and I saw that he was gazing at me with an unblinking stare. I felt like a rabbit about to be caught, frozen in fear as the hunter closed in. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the figure vanished. I was left standing there, bathed in darkness, wondering if I had really seen what I thought I had. But as I turned to leave, I saw that my car keys were lying on the ground, a few feet away from where I had been standing. It was then that I realized this wasn't just a trick of the light. This was something more, something sinister, and I knew that I had to get out of there before it was too late. As I sat at my desk, typing away on my latest story, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. It started with small things: a knock at the door, a faint noise outside, a feeling of being watched. But as the days went by, the occurrences grew more frequent and more intense. I began to notice strange conversations between the townspeople, whispers in huddled groups, and furtive glances exchanged in the streets. At first, I thought it was just small-town gossip, but as I listened in on these conversations, I realized that something sinister was at play. The talk of the figure and the woods sent shivers down my spine. Who or what was this figure, and what did they want with the townspeople? And why were they so afraid to speak its name aloud? I decided to do some digging, to see if I could uncover the truth behind these strange conversations. I started asking questions, trying to get to the bottom of things. But every time I pressed for answers, the responses seemed evasive, hesitant. It was as if the townspeople were afraid to talk about it, afraid to admit that something was wrong. And then one night, I stumbled upon a conversation that made my blood run cold. A group of teenagers huddled in a corner, speaking in hushed tones about the ritual and the sacrifice. It sounded like some kind of twisted game, but as I listened on, I realized that it was something much darker. They were talking about summoning something from the woods, something ancient and malevolent, and they thought they could control it. I knew then that I had to get out of there before it was too late. But as I turned to leave, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, watching me with an unblinking stare. It was the same figure from my dreams, the one who seemed to be lurking just beyond the tree line. And in that moment, I knew that I was trapped in a web of terror and there was no escape. Title: The Isolation of Winter. Text: As winter descended upon the town, it seemed as though the very sky itself was conspiring against me. The once blue heavens turned a sickly shade of gray, like a cold, wet blanket suffocating the earth. The wind howled through the streets, whipping up snowdrifts that reached waist-high in some places, making every step feel like a battle. And then there were the nights, endless, darkening nights that seemed to stretch on forever, punctuated only by the faint, flickering glow of streetlights. It was as though the world itself had been plunged into a deep, cold sleep, and I was trapped in this frozen nightmare, unable to wake up. The isolation was suffocating, like a physical force that pressed down upon me, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, even when I was alone. Every creak of the old wooden floorboards seemed to make me jump. Every snap of a twig outside made me spin around, wondering if something was lurking just beyond the window. And then there were the supernatural occurrences, the unexplained noises, the ghostly apparitions, the feeling of being pulled into some dark, ancient world that lurked just beneath the surface. It was as though the town itself had become a character in this twisted play, pulling me along with it, deeper and deeper into the heart of madness. I tried to keep myself occupied, filling my days with work and my nights with books and TV shows, but even those small comforts seemed to fade away under the weight of this crushing isolation. I felt like a rat in a cage, packing back and forth, waiting for anything to happen. But what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. The town's residents began to disappear, one by one, leaving behind only cryptic messages scrawled on the walls in blood-red letters. It was as though they had been taken by some dark, supernatural force, a force that seemed to be drawing me in with an otherworldly allure. I knew then that I was trapped in this living nightmare, and that there was no escape from the horrors that lurked within its frozen heart. As I delved deeper into the heart of Ravenswood, I began to uncover the dark secrets that lurked within its shadows. The townspeople spoke of an ancient evil that had awakened, a malevolent force that seemed to be pulling them all towards some sinister fate. They called it the Devourer, a creature of darkness and shadow that feasted on fear and terror. I knew then that I was in grave danger, for I had caught the attention of this evil presence. It was as though the very darkness itself had come alive, coalescing into a palpable force that pressed against my skin like a cold, clammy hand. I tried to avoid it, to steer clear of its reach, but it seemed to be everywhere, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to make a wrong move. The wind whispers secrets in the dead of night, and I could swear that I heard the Devourer's presence whispering my name, drawing me closer with an otherworldly allure. I knew then that I was trapped in a living nightmare from which there was no escape. The darkness closed in around me like a shroud, suffocating me with its crushing weight. I felt myself being pulled towards the heart of Ravenswood, towards some ancient evil that waited patiently in the shadows. And when I finally stumbled into the woods, I knew that I was face to face with my deepest fears. The trees seemed to twist and writhe around me, their branches like grasping fingers that reached out to snatch me back. I saw things moving in the darkness, shadowy figures darting between the trunks, eyes glowing like embers in the night. And then I heard the Devourer's voice, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "You should not have come here," it hissed, its breath cold and rank. "Now you will never leave." I tried to run, but my legs were frozen in terror, unable to move or speak. The darkness closed in around me, a living, breathing entity that seemed to be devouring me whole. And when the lights finally came back on, I was left standing alone in the woods, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. But something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. As winter tightened its grip on Ravenswood, I began to notice the subtle yet sinister ways it was taking over. The once vibrant streets were now shrouded in a perpetual gloom, as if the very sun itself had been extinguished. The wind howled through the empty streets like a chorus of lost souls, and the snow fell with a ferocity that seemed almost malevolent. It was as though winter had developed its own consciousness, one that was determined to freeze not just the bodies of the townspeople, but their very spirits as well. I saw it in the way they walked, their movements stiff and mechanical, as if they were mere puppets on strings controlled by some unseen force. I saw it in the way they spoke, their voices hushed and fearful, as if they were afraid to let their thoughts be heard. And I saw it in the way they looked at each other, their eyes filled with a creeping dread that seemed to seep into every pore of their being. Winter was not just a season. It was a state of mind, one that had taken hold of Ravenswood like a cold, unforgiving shroud. It was as though the town itself was slowly succumbing to its grasp, becoming increasingly isolated and withdrawn from the world beyond. The streets were empty, save for the occasional pair of eyes peering out from behind a window, watching and waiting with an unnerving intensity. And then there were the whispers. Oh, the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, speaking in hushed tones of dark rituals and ancient powers. It was as though winter itself had developed a secret language, one that only those who lived within its frozen heart could understand. I tried to ignore it, to keep my thoughts focused on the task at hand, but it was no use. Winter's chill seeped into my very bones, making me feel like a fragile, crumbling thing in its grasp. And then, one night, I saw it. A figure standing in the center of the street, shrouded in shadows and wreathed in a halo of frosty light. It was as though winter had come to life, taking on a form that was both human and not human at the same time. I felt a chill run down my spine as our eyes met, and for an instant I thought I saw something there, something ancient and malevolent that seemed to be looking straight through me. And then, just as suddenly, it vanished, leaving me shaken and confused. But the chill remained, lingering in my bones like a cold, hard stone that refused to melt. Winter's grip on Ravenswood was tightening by the day, and I knew that soon there would be no escape from its icy grasp. As I stood there, frozen in terror, I felt a presence behind me. I tried to turn around, but my body seemed rooted to the spot. The figure from the street appeared beside me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It reached out a hand and touched my forehead, and suddenly I was flooded with visions of the past and present. I saw Ravenswood in all its glory, a thriving town filled with laughter and joy. But then I saw it, the darkness that had taken hold, the fear that had consumed the townspeople. I saw the rituals and ceremonies that had been performed, the ancient powers that had been awakened. And I saw the true nature of winter, not just a season, but a state of mind. It was a veil that had been lifted, revealing the true horror that lay beneath. The figure spoke to me in a voice that was both familiar and yet utterly alien. "You have seen the truth," it said. "The fear that has taken hold of Ravenswood is not just a product of human psychology. It is a real thing, a living, breathing entity that has been awakened by our actions." I felt my mind reeling as the figure continued to speak. "We have meddled with forces beyond our understanding," it said. "We have played with fire and paid the price. Now, the veil is lifted, and we are faced with the true horror of what we have unleashed." As the figure spoke, I felt myself being pulled into a realm beyond my own, a realm where the laws of physics no longer applied, where time and space were fluid and malleable. I saw visions of ancient civilizations, of powerful beings who had harnessed the power of the universe to bend reality to their will, and I saw the true nature of fear, not just an emotion, but a force that could be wielded like a sword. The figure's eyes glowed brighter as it spoke, and I felt my own heart racing with fear. "We have been played," it said. "We have been used by forces beyond our control, and now we must face the consequences." As the figure finished speaking, the world around me seemed to dissolve into chaos. The buildings crumbled, the streets ran red with blood, and the sky turned a deep, foreboding gray. I was left standing alone, my mind reeling from the revelations that had been revealed to me. and in that moment I knew that I would never be the same again. As I stood there, frozen in terror, the figure's words echoed in my mind. The veil had been lifted, and I had seen the true horror that lay beneath. Ravenswood was no more, consumed by the very fear it had sought to harness. The town was gone, lost forever in a sea of darkness. But as I looked around, I realized that I was not alone. The figure stood beside me, its eyes still aglow with an otherworldly light. And then I saw them, the others who had been consumed by the fear. They were all around me, their faces twisted in terror, their eyes vacant and empty. I knew then that I was not just a witness to Ravenswood's downfall, but a part of it too. The fear had taken hold of me, and I was forever changed. As the darkness closed in, I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was alone. The figure was gone, and Ravenswood was no more. But I knew that I would never be able to escape the fear that had taken hold of me. It would haunt me forever, a constant reminder of what had happened in that forsaken town. And so, I walked away from Ravenswood, leaving behind the only home I had ever known. I knew that I would never find another place like it, a place where the fabric of reality was thin and the forces of darkness could seep through. But I also knew that I would never be able to truly escape the fear that had consumed me. It would follow me forever, a constant companion in my darkest moments. And so, I walked into the unknown, leaving behind the only life I had ever known. The wind howled around me, the trees creaked and groaned, and I felt the weight of Ravenswood's darkness bearing down upon me. But I kept walking, driven by a sense of duty, of obligation. For even though I was forever changed, I knew that I still had a purpose. And so I walked on into the unknown, leaving behind the ruins of Ravenswood. The last thing I saw was the figure's glowing eyes, watching me from the shadows. And then everything went black. But even in my dreams, I could feel its presence, watching over me, guiding me towards some unknown destiny. For I knew that I would never be able to truly escape the fear that had consumed me. It would always be with me, a constant reminder of what had happened in Ravenswood. And so, I remain, forever trapped in this living nightmare, tormented by the very thing that drove me to leave it all behind.